Smiles and family photos rarely show the tears shed when no one is looking. In that album, my brother and I smile in every picture, every single one. Hello, my dears. This is Grandma Margaret speaking to you at 68 years old, coming to you directly from my simple home in Asheville, North Carolina, where the mountain chill keeps me company along with my memories. Those who see me now with my floral apron, my retired hairdresser's scissors, and my hair products scattered around the house would never imagine what I lived through as a girl. Before starting this difficult story, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching. If this story touches your heart, please leave a like, subscribe and tell me in the comments which part of America you're listening from. It helps me feel less alone with these heavy memories. I was born in 1957 in a small town in rural Georgia, one of those with a central square, a main church, and streets that resembled dirt labyrinths. Our house was near the lake, a simple brick home my father Anthony built with his own hands. There were 4 of us: my father Anthony, my mother Josephine, myself, and my brother Thomas, 5 years younger than me. To outsiders, we were the perfect family. My father worked for the county, my mother taught at the local elementary school, and we children were always clean, with combed hair and pressed clothes at Sunday services. We were that family people pointed to and said, "Look, what an example." But inside the walls of our home, the story was very different. From a young age, I felt the weight of my brother's eyes on my back. It wasn't a look of admiration or brotherly affection. It was a gaze loaded with something I only came to understand years later: pure, distilled envy. "Why did Margaret get a higher grade than me, Mom? She doesn't even study that much," he would complain, even when he got good grades himself. "Why is Margaret's cake prettier? You helped her, didn't you?" he would question when we did activities together. "Why does everyone only talk about Margaret? I can sing too," he would shout at family gatherings when relatives asked me to sing a song. At first, I thought it was just childish behavior that would pass with time, but as Thomas grew, that little seed of resentment grew too, watered by the constant comparison he himself made between us. My father Anthony was a man of few words, the kind whose smile in the street transformed into a stern face as soon as the door closed behind him. There were good days when he brought candy from town and told stories after dinner, but there were bad days when alcohol spoke louder, and any child's noise was reason for shouting and using his belt. "Girls can't be smarter than boys. It's not natural," he would say when I showed my report card full of high marks. "You'll end up an old maid if you keep showing off all that knowledge." My mother Josephine lived divided. On one hand, she was proud of me, of my achievements at school, of how I helped around the house. On the other, she tried not to provoke her husband's anger or her son's envy. It was as if she were walking on eggshells. "Let Thomas win this time, honey," she would whisper before games. "Your father isn't in a good mood today. Better not draw attention to yourself," she would warn at other times. I grew up learning to diminish myself to avoid causing trouble. When I won an award at school, I hid it. When I learned something new, I kept it to myself. It was safer to be invisible, to be less, but that wasn't enough for Thomas. The more I tried to hide, the more he seemed to hate me, as if my very existence was a personal offense. "You've always been the favorite, haven't you? Perfect Margaret, Mommy and Daddy's little flower." He would spit the words when we were alone. "One day they'll see who you really are." I didn't understand. I hadn't done anything to deserve that hatred. On the contrary, I tried to please him in every way. I let him have my toys, I gave up my spot in front of the TV, I shared my candy. Nothing helped. Things got worse when I turned 12 and Thomas was 7. That's when I noticed my father started drinking more, coming home later, yelling for any reason. The arguments with my mother, previously rare, became routine. "You think I don't know where you've been, Anthony? The whole town is talking," my mother would shout. "Shut your mouth, woman. If you were a real wife, I wouldn't need to look in the streets for what I don't have at home," he would retort. On nights like these, I would hug Thomas in the bed we shared, trying to protect him from the screams, the ugly words, the sound of things breaking. In these rare moments, he would allow himself to be comforted, small and frightened in my arms. But the next morning, the hatred would return full force, as if he blamed me for our parents' fights too. It was on one of those stormy nights, not of rain, but of screams and violence, that everything fell apart completely. My father came home, drunker than usual. My mother, tired of suffering so much, confronted him. "Either you change, Anthony, or I'm leaving and taking the children," she threatened. I'll never forget the sound of his hand against her face, the dull thud of her body falling, the scream of horror that escaped my throat when I saw blood trickling from the corner of my mother's mouth. That night, we slept at my maternal grandmother's house. The next morning, my mother decided we wouldn't return home. She packed our clothes in 2 old suitcases and announced we would move to Atlanta, where her sister had a larger house and could take us in. That's when the second blow came. Thomas refused to go. "I want to stay with Daddy," he said, clinging to my father's leg, who, sober and remorseful as he always was after drinking binges, promised the world and beyond. "Son, come with Mommy. It will be better for all of us there," my mother begged. "No, let Margaret go. I'm staying with Daddy," he screamed, tears streaming down his small face. My father, seeing an opportunity to hurt my mother even more, clung to this. "The boy wants to stay with me, Josephine, and he will. If you want to leave with the girl, that's your problem." That's how our family broke in half. My mother and I heading to Atlanta, my father and brother staying in the small town where it all began. The farewell was quick and painful. Thomas didn't even look at me when I got on the bus. My father just gave a dry nod of his head, and off we went, 2 wounded women to start over somewhere else. The first months in Atlanta were difficult, but somehow lighter. My Aunt Constance welcomed us with open arms to her house in the Kirkwood neighborhood. It was a simple home, but larger than ours, with a yard full of plants and a small chicken coop that immediately charmed me. My mother got a job at the same school where my aunt worked, and I was enrolled there too. For the first time, I didn't have to worry about hiding my good grades or letting someone win on purpose. I could simply be myself. "You're such a smart girl, Margaret," my new teacher, Ms. Elisa, would say. "You have a bright future ahead of you," and I believed it. For the first time, I truly believed I could be someone, do something important in life. Gradually, news of my father and Thomas became rarer. A phone call at Christmas, a message brought by someone who passed through our hometown. We learned that my father had found a new girlfriend, that Thomas was doing well in school, that life went on. I missed my brother despite everything. I kept things to tell him when we would see each other again. About the Atlanta farmers market that left me open-mouthed the first time. About the goat my aunt raised in her backyard. About the new friends I'd made at school. I hoped that with distance, that hatred would have dissipated. 3 years passed like this, in a peaceful routine of school, household chores, and small joys. I was 15 now, becoming a young lady as my aunt said. I started getting interested in hair, makeup, the boys on the street, normal things for my age. That's when we received news that would change everything again. My father had fallen ill, something with his liver, a consequence of years of heavy drinking. He was bedridden, needing care. "We need to go see him, honey," said my mother, her face contorted in a mix of concern and resentment. "Despite everything, he's your father." And so, on a Sunday in July 1972, we took the bus back to our hometown. My stomach knotted with anxiety, my hands sweaty with nervousness. I didn't know how it would be to see my father again after so long, and especially, I didn't know how it would be to see Thomas, now 10 years old, at the height of boyhood. What I didn't imagine was that trip, that family reunion lunch, would be the beginning of my true nightmare. A nightmare no 15-year-old girl should ever live. Certain wounds are so deep that even after 50 years, they still burn as if they were made yesterday. What happened on that Sunday in July 1972 is one of those wounds I carry in my soul. The bus dropped us off at the small bus station in my hometown around 9 in the morning. The familiar smell of dry earth and flowering dogwoods hit me like a slap. It was as if time hadn't passed there. The same whitewashed houses, the same central square with the peeling bandstand, the same cloudless blue Georgia sky. We went straight to my paternal grandmother's house, where my father had been living since he fell ill. Thomas was with him, of course. My heart was beating so hard in my chest that I thought it would break my ribs. How would it be to see my little brother after 3 years? Would he still hate me with the same intensity? Or would time and distance have softened that childish grudge? My grandmother's house was in the upper part of town, an old construction with thick walls and blue windows. When we arrived, my grandmother Dolores greeted us at the door, more aged than I remembered, her face marked by deep wrinkles that told stories of recent worry. "Josephine, Margaret, good that you came," she said, hugging us without much enthusiasm. "Anthony is in the living room, lying on the sofa. The doctor said he shouldn't stay in bed too much during the day. It's bad for his lungs." We entered the cool, dark living room, the lace curtains filtering the strong morning light. And there he was, my father, lying on a sofa covered with white sheets. He was unrecognizable. The strong and intimidating man of my childhood had transformed into a yellowed skeleton, his eyes sunken in purple circles, his unshaven beard highlighting the thinness of his face even more. "You really came?" he said in a weak voice that didn't match at all the image I had kept of him. My mother approached first, cautious like someone approaching an unfamiliar dog. "We came as soon as we heard, Anthony. How are you feeling?" "Like a man who drank his whole life and is now paying the price," he answered with a bitter smile. "Margaret, come here. Let me see you properly. You've turned into a young lady." I approached, my heart still racing. Up close, the smell of illness was stronger, a mix of medicines and old sweat that made me nauseous. Still, I leaned in when he extended his hand to touch my face. His fingers were cold and trembling. "You're pretty like your mother," he murmured. "Thomas will be happy to see you." He had barely pronounced these words when we heard the back door slam. Quick footsteps crossed the kitchen, and then he appeared in the living room. My brother. Only he was no longer the little boy I had left behind. He was taller, of course, but there was something else. Something in his eyes that caused me to shiver instantly. "Mom! Margaret!" He stopped at the door, holding a half-eaten mango, the juice running down his fingers. "Thomas, my son." My mother opened her arms, tears in her eyes. He came to us, first hugging my mother tightly, then stopping in front of me. I hesitated, not knowing if I should hug him or not. He resolved it for me, giving me a quick, stiff hug without emotion. "You're different," he said, analyzing me from head to toe. "You too," I responded, uncomfortable with the way he was looking at me, as if he were evaluating me. My grandmother announced she was going to prepare lunch, that we should make ourselves at home. My mother offered to help, and the two went to the kitchen, leaving me in the living room with my father and brother. The silence that followed was suffocating. My father closed his eyes, seeming exhausted, just from receiving us. Thomas continued staring at me in that strange way until he finally spoke. "Come see my car collection. It's grown a lot since you left." I followed him down the hallway to the room that had been my father's in childhood and now belonged to Thomas. It was a small room with a window that looked out onto the backyard. The narrow bed was covered with a patchwork quilt, and on the shelves, dozens of metal cars were perfectly aligned. "They're nice," I commented, genuinely impressed with the collection. "You take good care of them. Dad gives me one every time we go to the big city," he said, obvious pride in his voice. "He says I'm the son who stayed, that I deserve presents." The barb was clear, but I decided to ignore it. I hadn't come all this way to fight. "Tell me how school has been, your friends." I tried to make conversation. He shrugged, picking up one of the cars and spinning its wheels with his finger. "Normal. I'm the best in the class now." He raised his eyes to me. "Dad says you took all the family intelligence when you left, but he was wrong." I tried a few more conversations, all received with the same coldness. After a while, I gave up and suggested we return to the living room. That's when he grabbed me by the arm, his fingers squeezing with surprising strength for a 10-year-old boy. "Why did you come back? We were fine without you." The hostility in his voice scared me. "We came to see Dad, Thomas. He's sick. He was sick with missing you all this time, and you never came. Now that he's dying, you show up. For what?" I didn't know what to respond, how to explain to a 10-year-old child the complexities of a failed marriage, of a painful separation, how to say that we were afraid of what my father might do if we appeared before. "I'm sorry," was all I managed to say. Sorry for having left. Something passed across his face, a shadow, a tremor. For an instant, I thought I saw the little boy I had left behind, vulnerable and frightened. But it passed quickly, replaced by the mask of hostility. Too late for apologies, he replied, releasing me. Let's go back before they miss us. Lunch was served at the large dining room table, covered with a crocheted tablecloth that my grandmother only used on special occasions. My father was helped to the table, supported on Thomas's shoulder, who seemed proud of this caretaker role. We ate in silence, broken only by superficial conversations about the weather, about acquaintances from town, about things that didn't matter. After lunch, my mother and grandmother went to wash the dishes. My father said he needed to lie down a bit, that the food had made him drowsy. Thomas offered to help him to the bedroom, and the two left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I got up to look at the photos on the wall, old family photos I barely recognized. In one, my young and smiling parents held a baby, me, newly born. In another, my father in a football team uniform, proud and strong. It was strange to see those images of happiness knowing how the story had continued. I was so absorbed in the photographs that I didn't hear the footsteps behind me. When a hand touched my shoulder, I jumped. "Calm down, it's me," said my father, who didn't seem as fragile as minutes before. "I thought you were going to help me lie down. Thomas went to get my medicine at the pharmacy. I wanted some time alone with you." Something in his voice alerted me. It wasn't the tone of a father who wanted to talk with his daughter. It was something more predatory. "Mom and Grandma are in the kitchen. I can call them to help," I suggested, taking a step back. "No need to bother them," he said, taking a step forward, nullifying the distance I had created. "You're a young lady now. You can help me by yourself." What happened next is still difficult to tell, even after so many years. His hand that should have been resting on my shoulder going down, touching where it shouldn't. His mouth murmuring horrible things in my ear as he pushed me toward the bedroom. The smell of illness mixed with the breath of whiskey. He was drinking in secret, even while sick. "Stop, Dad, please," I begged, trying to break free, panic growing inside me like a giant wave. "You look so much like your mother when she was young," he continued, as if he hadn't heard me. "But you're prettier. You were always my favorite." When I managed to disentangle myself and run to the door, it opened before I reached it. It was Thomas, returning from the pharmacy. "Margaret, what's going on?" he asked, his eyes going from my panicked face to our father behind me. "Nothing, son," replied my father with a frightening naturalness. "Your sister was just helping me lie down, but you can continue from here." I took the opportunity to escape, hurriedly passing by Thomas, my heart almost jumping out of my mouth. I ran to the bathroom at the end of the hallway, locked the door, and collapsed on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. What had just happened? Had I misunderstood? Was I exaggerating? But I knew in the depths of my soul that I wasn't. My father's intentions had been as clear as water. I stayed in the bathroom long enough to regain control, to wash my face, to convince myself that I could face the rest of that day. When I came out, the house seemed quiet. My mother and grandmother were still in the kitchen. I could hear their muffled voices. I decided to go there, to stay near them where I would feel safe. I was passing through the living room when Thomas appeared again, blocking my path. "We need to talk," he said, his face too serious for his 10 years. "Not now, Thomas. I need to talk to Mom. It's about Dad, what he did to you." His voice was low, almost a whisper. "It's not the first time." I froze in place. "What do you mean?" "He does this with the girls from the neighborhood. Promises candy, toys. Some come here when Gran's out. I see everything through the door crack." The horror of what he was saying hit me like a punch. My father, a predator of children. And Thomas knew, observed. "Why have you never told anyone?" I asked, barely recognizing my own voice. He shrugged, a terribly adult gesture. "He's my dad. And the girls always come back, so I guess they don't mind." I was dealing with a child who had been corrupted, whose sense of right and wrong had been completely distorted. A wave of pity flooded me, along with an even greater fear. "Thomas, this is wrong. Very wrong. We need to tell someone." It was then that he smiled, a smile I will never forget. "I know it's wrong, and I know something else, too." "What?" "I know that Dad told me you abandoned us because you thought I was stupid and ugly, that you laughed at me behind my back, that you prayed every night for me to die." My blood froze. "That's a lie, Thomas. I never—" "He wouldn't lie to me. He stayed with me when you and Mom left. And before I could process what was happening, he took a step forward and put his hand on my chest, in the same way my father had done minutes before. And now I'm going to show you that I'm not that weak little boy anymore, that I've learned a lot from Dad in these years. I won't describe in detail what followed. Some memories are too heavy to put into words. I will only say that in that dark hallway, my own brother, a 10-year-old child, tried to do to me what he had certainly seen our father do to other girls. The shock was so great that I was paralyzed, unable to react. It was only when I heard my mother's voice calling my name that I managed to move away, pushing Thomas forcefully. "What's going on here?" my mother asked, appearing at the kitchen door. "Nothing, Mom," I began, my voice faltering. "Margaret was showing me how to kiss," Thomas said with a frightening naturalness. "She said she was going to teach me grown-up things." The horrified look my mother gave me when she turned to me is something I will never forget. The doubt in her eyes, the uncertainty about who to believe. "It's not true, Mom. He's lying. He and Dad, I couldn't finish. How to explain the inexplicable? "Go to the kitchen, Thomas," my mother ordered, her voice trembling. He obeyed, not without first giving me a look of triumph, a look that clearly said, "See? No one will believe you." When we were alone, my mother held my arms, looking at me intensely. "What really happened, Margaret? And don't come to me with lies." Something in her firmness gave me courage. I told her everything, the words coming in a torrent. What my father had tried to do, what Thomas had said about other girls, what he himself had tried to do to me. With each word, my mother's face grew paler, more rigid. When I finished, she was shaking as much as I was. "My daughter," she whispered, hugging me tightly. "My daughter, forgive me. I should have guessed, should have suspected." In that embrace, I felt that she believed me, and that made all the difference. "We are leaving right now," she said determinedly. "I'll get our things. Don't stay alone for a minute. Come with me." But before we could leave the room, my father appeared at the bedroom door, Thomas at his side. The two looked like a distorted version of the same being, the older teaching the younger how to be a monster. "Where are you going in such a hurry?" my father asked, his voice slurred. "The visit has barely begun." My mother stood in front of me, a lioness protecting her cub. "We've seen enough, Anthony, and you should be ashamed." I saw my father advance, staggering but determined. I saw Thomas following his example, his face contorted into a mask of childish hatred. And then the front door opened with a bang, making everyone freeze in place. A tall, strong figure entered the room, wearing the blue uniform that inspired as much respect as fear in those days. It was my Uncle Augustus, my mother's brother, the military man. The figure of my Uncle Augustus filled the room as if the very air had been replaced by his presence. Tall, broad-shouldered, skin weathered by the southern sun, and eyes that seemed to see through people. His impeccably pressed military uniform contrasted with the suffocating environment of that house. "Josephine, Margaret," his voice echoed firmly as his eyes quickly scanned the scene before him. My mother protectively in front of me, my father and Thomas frozen like pillars of salt, the air charged with tension that anyone with a drop of sensitivity could cut with a knife. It was as if time stopped for an instant. I had never seen my Uncle Augustus in person before that day. He lived in Virginia, served in the Marines, and rarely visited the family. I knew him only from photographs and from the stories my mother told about her older brother, who had helped raise her after my maternal grandparents died. At that moment, he seemed like an avenging angel straight out of the biblical stories the Sunday school teacher told. "What's going on here?" he asked, his gaze now fixed on my mother, noticing her state of agitation. My mother, who seconds before seemed like a lioness ready to attack, suddenly collapsed. Her shoulders fell, her hands began to tremble, and silent tears streamed down her face, marked by recent suffering. "Augustus, thank God you came. We need to leave here now." My father, momentarily destabilized by the unexpected arrival, recovered his bravado. The man who minutes before seemed fragile and sick now straightened up, pulling Thomas close to him as if forming a small fortress. "This is my house, military man. You have no right to enter like this. My wife and daughter are visiting me. It's a family matter." The look my uncle gave my father was like lightning cutting the sky on a stormy night. In it were decades of mistrust, of stories heard in corners, of suspicions never confirmed until that moment. "Josephine, get your things. We're leaving now," he ordered, without taking his eyes off my father. It was then that Thomas, that 10-year-old boy whose heart had already been poisoned beyond salvation, decided to show his loyalty to the man who had corrupted him. "They can't go. Margaret was doing things to me. She started it, didn't she, Dad?" The accusation hung in the air for a second before I could react. "That's a lie. It was him and Dad who tried to attack me," I shouted, my voice choked by contained tears. The tension in the room was so dense that I felt as if I couldn't breathe properly. My grandmother Dolores appeared at the kitchen door, confused by the tumult, drying her hands on her apron. "What's happening here?" "Augustus, what are you doing here?" My uncle didn't respond to my grandmother. Instead, he took a step forward, his eyes never leaving my father, who instinctively backed away. "Josephine telegraphed me yesterday, asked me to come because she was worried about meeting you, Anthony. It seems she had reason to be concerned." He then turned to me, and for the first time, I noticed how his eyes, despite the hardness of the rest of his face, were gentle, like my mother's. "Margaret, what happened here? Can you tell me?" I felt the gazes upon me, the weight of that moment, the choice I had to make. If I told the truth, I would expose not only my father, but also my brother, would destroy what was left of our family. If I kept quiet, who knows what else could happen with how many other girls. Courage came from a place I didn't know existed within me. I looked directly at my uncle and told him everything. About my father's hands where they shouldn't be, about Thomas's words revealing that this happened with other girls, about how my own brother had tried to imitate his father with me. As I spoke, I saw my Uncle Augustus's face transform. The mask of military control broke, revealing a fury so deep, so visceral, that it made me take a step back. "You monster," he murmured, turning slowly to my father. "You disgusting monster." What followed was so fast that I have only flashes in my memory. My uncle advancing on my father, the sound of fists meeting flesh, my father staggering backwards, falling onto the living room table, Thomas screaming, trying to defend his father, being pushed away with a shove that sent him to the other side of the room. My mother pulled me to the back of the house, protecting me from the chaos that had erupted. I heard my grandmother begging them to stop, heard the noise of furniture breaking, of glass shattering. "Mom, Uncle is going to kill him," I whispered, terrified by the violence I had unleashed. "Your uncle knows what he's doing," she replied, her voice strangely calm now. "He won't kill anyone. He's just doing what should have been done long ago." We stayed in the kitchen, embracing, listening to the sounds of the storm in the living room. Minutes later that seemed like hours. My uncle appeared at the door. His impeccable uniform was now wrinkled. There was blood on the sleeve and cuff of his shirt, but his eyes were calm again, as if the fury had been completely exorcised. "Everything is under control," he said. "Get your things. We're leaving." "And Dad and Thomas?" I asked, still trembling. A hard smile appeared at the corner of my uncle's mouth. "Your father is alive, if that's what you want to know. Maybe with some broken bones, but alive." "And my brother?" I hesitated. He hesitated, as if choosing his words. "Your brother has many problems ahead of him, but don't worry about them now." When we returned to the living room, my father was lying on the couch, his face unrecognizable under the bruises that were beginning to form. Blood trickled from his nose and mouth. Thomas was sitting on the floor, huddled in a corner, his eyes wide with fear. My grandmother was beside my father, cleaning the blood with a damp cloth, murmuring words I couldn't understand. No one stopped us when we picked up our small suitcases and headed for the door. Before leaving, however, my uncle stopped and turned to my father. "I'll be watching you, Anthony. One wrong move, one single complaint about you approaching any child, and I'll come back to finish what I started today. Understand?" My father didn't respond, just moaned softly. "And as for you, boy," my uncle continued, addressing Thomas, still in the corner, "there's still time for you not to become like your father. Think about that." The journey back to the bus station was made in heavy silence. My uncle drove the borrowed military jeep, my mother beside him, me in the back seat, hugging my suitcase as if it were a shield. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, relief that we had escaped, shame for what had happened, worry about what would come next. It was only when we reached the bus station, waiting for the next bus to Atlanta, that my uncle finally broke the silence. "You can't go back there," he said, looking directly at my mother. "It's not safe. Anthony might want revenge when he recovers." "Where will we go then?" my mother asked, her voice small and tired. "To Norfolk with me. I have space in the apartment. It's not much, but it has 2 bedrooms. You take mine. I'll sleep in the living room until we find something better." And so, instead of returning to Atlanta, we boarded a bus to Norfolk, Virginia, leaving behind not only that small town, but also the last illusions about the possibility of a family reconciliation. The journey was long and silent. I looked out the bus window, watching the dry landscape of rural Georgia gradually transform into the greener valleys that announced the proximity of the coast. I felt as if each mile distanced us, not only geographically, but also emotionally, from that nightmare. Norfolk welcomed us with its peculiar light, reflected in the waters of the many rivers and the bay. It was a big city, noisy, full of life and possibilities. My uncle's apartment was in an old building in the Ghent neighborhood near the base where he served. It was small, as he had warned, but clean and organized with military precision. That first night, after my mother finally fell asleep, exhausted, in the borrowed bedroom, I stayed in the living room with my uncle. He had prepared the sofa to sleep on, but was still sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of black coffee in his hand, his gaze lost on the wall. "Uncle," I called softly, approaching, "thank you for today, for believing me." He looked at me as if he had forgotten I was there, then his face softened a little. "No need to thank me, Margaret. I only did what any decent man would do." I sat across from him, my hands restless in my lap. "What will happen now? With my father and my brother, I mean?" He sighed, running his hand over his tired face. "Your father will be reported. I have friends in the police. I'll make sure they investigate the case of the other girls your brother mentioned. As for Thomas," he hesitated. "He's a child who was poisoned by his own father, but still a child. Maybe with the right help he can change." "Do you think he can really change, after what he tried to do?" My uncle looked at me for a long moment before answering. "I don't know, Margaret. I'd like to say yes, that everyone can be saved with love and proper guidance. But the truth is that some seeds fall on fertile soil, others on rocky soil. Only time will tell what kind of man your brother will become." That conversation was etched in my memory. My uncle's honesty, his refusal to offer me false guarantees, was strangely comforting. It was as if, after years of living among half-truths and complete lies, someone was finally treating me as someone capable of facing reality, however harsh it might be. In the days that followed, we gradually adapted to life in Norfolk. My uncle helped my mother find work at a public school, and I was enrolled in the nearby state high school. Life began to take on a new routine, a new normality. But inside, I was far from normal. The nightmares began almost immediately. Vivid dreams where my father and Thomas chased me down dark corridors, where hands emerged from the walls to grab me, where I screamed for help and no one heard. I would wake up sweating, my heart racing, often screaming so loudly that I woke my mother and uncle. They would come running, turn on the light, assure me that everything was fine, that I was safe. But I didn't feel safe, not at all. During the day, I would startle at any unexpected touch. At school, I couldn't concentrate on classes. I jumped at the slightest noise, constantly looking over my shoulder as if expecting to see my father or brother at any moment. And there was the shame, a deep, irrational shame that made me feel dirty, even after several showers, as if what had happened, or almost happened, had left an invisible mark on me that everyone could see. My mother noticed, of course. One night, after another particularly terrible nightmare, she sat on the edge of my bed and held my hands in hers. "It wasn't your fault, Margaret," she said, the words coming with difficulty. "Nothing that happened was your fault. The fault is theirs, only theirs." I wanted to believe her, really wanted to. But the seed of doubt had already been planted, and that seed would grow in the following years, transforming into a tree of self-deprecation and self-blame that almost completely destroyed me. My uncle kept his promise. A month after the incident, we received news that my father had been arrested. The investigation revealed that there were at least 5 other girls in town he had molested. 5 children whose parents finally had the courage to report when they learned they weren't the only ones. As for Thomas, he was sent to live with a paternal aunt in Charlotte. I knew from occasional letters from my grandmother that he was adapting and receiving help. I wanted to believe this meant he was changing, recovering from the toxic influence of our father. But a part of me always feared that wherever he was, he carried that look, that intention. The months passed. I turned 16, then 17. Life in Norfolk had its difficulties, but also its beauties. I discovered the sea, the immense and frightening Atlantic Ocean, so different from the small lakes of the interior. I discovered the Navy festivals, the colorful and noisy crowds that took to the streets. I discovered a city that, despite all its problems, pulsed with an energy that fascinated me. But inside, the storm continued. The nightmares, though less frequent, still came. The distrust of any man who approached, the fear of touch, the constant shame. All this remained like a shadow that faithfully follows your steps without ever letting you see its face. It was in this fragile emotional state that I entered adulthood, and it was in this state that I faced the darkest years of my existence, years that would take me so deep into the well of despair that I came to doubt if I would ever see light again. They say physical wounds heal, but those of the soul can bleed for decades without anyone noticing. I carried my invisible wounds through the streets of Norfolk like someone carrying a cross too heavy for their shoulders. The last years of my adolescence passed in a fog of fear and confusion. I completed high school at the insistence of my mother, who repeated like a mantra, "Education is the only thing no one can take from you, my daughter." But while my classmates dreamed of universities and careers, I could only think about surviving until the next day without being swallowed by the abyss growing inside me. In 1975, at 18, I got my first job as a receptionist at a small beauty salon in downtown Norfolk. It didn't pay much, but it was enough to help with expenses and give me some independence. My mother continued teaching. My uncle Augustus continued his military career, and the 3 of us had found a fragile balance in that improvised life. It was at the salon that I discovered my affinity with hair. I watched, fascinated, as the hairdressers transformed ordinary women into queens with just a cut, a blowout, a dye job. In my free moments, I asked to practice on mannequins, learning techniques, memorizing color combinations, mastering the use of each tool. "You have talent, girl," said Miss Celia, the owner, an energetic middle-aged woman who dyed her hair an impossible red. "You should take the professional course." And so I did. I saved every penny for almost a year until I could pay for the technical hairdressing course. It was good to have something to focus all my energy on, something that didn't involve thinking about the past or fearing the future. When I had the scissors in my hand, working on hair, there was only the present moment, the texture under my fingers, the challenge of creating something beautiful. But when the salon door closed at the end of the day, when I returned to the apartment that we now shared, just my mother and I, my uncle had been transferred to Washington, D.C., the darkness returned, a darkness that not even the city lights could dispel. The nightmares hadn't ceased. Now they were less frequent, but more intense. I would wake up screaming, my body drenched in sweat, my throat hurting from the effort of fighting ghosts that only I saw. My mother, exhausted after years of dealing with my night terrors, could no longer comfort me as before. "Maybe you should talk to someone, daughter," she would suggest, her eyes marked by deep circles. A doctor? A psychologist? But how to explain the inexplicable to a stranger? How to put into words the sensation of being dirty inside, corrupted by something I hadn't even completely experienced? Besides, at that time, in the mid-70s, seeking psychological help still carried a heavy stigma. It was practically admitting you were crazy. So instead of seeking help, I sought escape, and I found it initially in the arms of a man who seemed different from all the others, who caused me so much fear. Charles was a client of the salon where I worked, a bank employee, always well-dressed, educated, with a smile that seemed to light up the environment. He was the first man who didn't cause me that immediate sense of alert, that desire to run in the opposite direction. We started dating when I was 19. At first, he was patient with my fears, with my reluctance for any more intimate physical contact. He waited 3 months until I allowed our first kiss, 6 more until I let his hand slide beyond my waist. "I understand that you need time," he would say, caressing my face with a delicacy that made me believe that maybe, just maybe, not all men were like my father and brother. Our relationship progressed slowly. At 20, I thought I was finally ready for true intimacy, that I had overcome my traumas, that I could be a normal woman with normal desires. I was wrong. The first time we tried to make love, I froze completely. My body became rigid as stone, tears flooded my eyes, and I began to shake uncontrollably. Charles stopped immediately, confused and concerned. "Margaret, what's wrong? Did I hurt you?" I couldn't respond. How to explain that it wasn't him, but the ghosts of my past that were terrorizing me? How to tell about my father, about Thomas, without him looking at me with disgust, or worse, with pity? I made up excuses, said I was nervous, that it was my first time, that I needed more time. He accepted, understanding as always. But after that episode, something changed between us. A distance set in, imperceptible at first, but growing each day. 2 months later, he ended our relationship. "It's not fair to you or to me," he explained, avoiding my gaze. "You're clearly not ready for a relationship, and I need to move on with my life." It was as if a dagger were thrust into my chest. The rejection brought to the surface all my worst fears, that I was irreparably broken, that I would never be loved, that what my father and Thomas had done, or tried to do, had marked me forever with a kind of invisible curse. In the months that followed, I sank into a deep depression. I went to work mechanically, returned home, locked myself in my room, barely ate, barely slept. When I managed to fall asleep, the nightmares were so violent that I would wake up screaming. My nails dug into my own palms with such force that they left marks for days. My mother, desperate, didn't know what to do anymore. She even called my uncle in D.C., begging for help. He suggested she take me to a military hospital where he had contacts, where they might be able to help me. But I vehemently refused. The fear of being institutionalized, of being labeled as crazy, was greater than the desire to rid myself of that pain. It was at this time, at the bottom of the well, that I found another form of escape: alcohol. It started innocently, with a glass of wine to help me sleep. Soon it progressed to an entire bottle, then to stronger drinks, whiskey, rum, whatever was available and cheap enough for my salary, increasingly compromised by my new addiction. Drinking didn't solve the problems, but it blurred them enough for me to function. It was like putting a bandage over an infected wound. It didn't cure, just hid the problem that continued to rot underneath. In 1978, at 21, I lost my job at the salon. I arrived late once, twice, 3 times. I showed up drunk on a Tuesday morning. Miss Celia, who had been so good to me, called me to the small office at the back of the salon. "Margaret, you know I like you like a daughter," she said, her voice choked. "But I can't allow this anymore. You need help, not a job." I left there devastated, but not surprised. Part of me knew I was in a downward spiral, that each day was worse than the previous one, that I was slowly and methodically self-destructing. In the years that followed, I strung one odd job after another. I worked as a cleaner, as a street vendor, as a kitchen helper. Nothing lasted more than a few months. The alcohol always won, always pulled me back into the abyss. My mother, who had been my safe harbor for so long, began to wither before my eyes. The stress of seeing me in that state, the impotence of not being able to help me, were undermining her health. In 1980, when I was 23, she suffered a stroke that left her partially paralyzed on the left side. Suddenly, the roles were reversed. Now it was I who needed to take care of her. I tried, I swear, I tried. For a few weeks I stayed sober, took on responsibilities, did the best I could. But the pressure was too great, the guilt was crushing, and soon I went back to drinking. A kind neighbor, Mrs. Eunice, began to help with my mother when she realized I wasn't in a condition to do so. She would come in the morning, give her a bath, prepare food, stay until I returned from work, when I had work. "Your mother doesn't deserve this, my child," she said to me one afternoon when she found me staggering in the apartment hallway. "And neither do you. You're young, beautiful, have a whole life ahead of you. I laughed in her face. A whole life ahead of me? What kind of life? One where every shadow reminded me of my father, where every man who crossed my path made me think of Thomas, where the simple act of existing was a daily torture. It was on a dawn in 1982, after losing yet another job and drinking until I lost consciousness, that I hit rock bottom. I woke up on the bathroom floor, surrounded by my own vomit, not remembering how I had gotten there. The broken mirror above the sink saw a stranger, tangled hair, sunken eyes, yellowish skin, cracked lips, a 25-year-old woman who looked 45. That morning, in a clarity that only comes when there is nothing more to lose, I made a decision. I didn't want to live like this anymore. I couldn't live like this anymore. I climbed to the roof of our building, an 8-story building in downtown Norfolk. It was early, the sun had barely risen, and the city was beginning to awaken below me. The noise of the first buses, of shops opening, of life that continued implacably without caring about my pain. I approached the edge, feeling the cold morning wind on my face. I wasn't afraid. For the first time in years, I didn't feel fear, just a kind of resigned peace, an end to the suffering. I was ready to take the last step when a voice behind me made me freeze. "Miss, don't do that." I turned slowly. It was the building's janitor, Mr. Manuel, an elderly gentleman with hands calloused from hard work and kind eyes that had seen more of life than I would ever see. "Go away, Mr. Manuel," I said, my voice choked. "Leave me in peace." "I can't do that, my child," he replied, taking a cautious step in my direction. "Any problem has a solution. Only death doesn't. Death has no return." "Some problems don't have a solution," I retorted bitterly. "Some ghosts never leave." "True," he agreed, to my surprise. "Some ghosts stay, but we learn to live with them, to make peace with them." Something in the simplicity of his response hit me. It wasn't a platitude, an empty phrase. It was the raw truth of someone who also carried his own ghost. "How?" I asked, tears now flowing freely. "How do you do that?" "One day at a time, with help." He extended his calloused hand to me. "Come, let's go downstairs. Mrs. Eunice told me about a place that can help you. A group of people who have been through what you're going through." In that moment, suspended between life and death, something inside me broke, but it wasn't like the previous breaks that only left me weaker. It was as if a hard shell had cracked, allowing something new to emerge. I went down from the roof with Mr. Manuel, and that same afternoon, he and Mrs. Eunice took me to my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. I won't say it was easy. The first days of sobriety were hell. My body, accustomed to alcohol, rebelled violently. Tremors, cold sweats, constant nausea, hallucinations that made the nightmares seem like child's play. But for the first time in years, I wasn't alone in my struggle. I had the group, people who understood exactly what I was going through because they had been through the same. I had Mrs. Eunice, who took care of my mother while I recovered. I had Mr. Manuel, who appeared every day to check if I was okay, bringing fresh bread from the bakery and simple words of encouragement. Slowly, day by day, I began to rebuild my life. First, I recovered my physical health. Then I got a job as an assistant at a small beauty salon in the Ghent neighborhood. It wasn't the dream job, but it was honest and allowed me to use my skills with hair, which, surprisingly, I hadn't completely lost despite years of neglect. The hardest part, however, was facing the ghosts that tormented me. In sobriety, without the nebulous shield of alcohol, the memories of my father, of my brother, of what almost happened in that house in 1972 returned with full force. I spent entire nights awake, trembling, not from the lack of alcohol, but from the fear that seemed impregnated in every cell of my body. It was Mary Helen, my sponsor at AA, who suggested I seek professional help. "You're not just fighting against alcohol, Margaret," she said during one of our meetings. "You're fighting against traumas that need to be treated by someone who understands these things." Reluctantly, I finally agreed to consult a psychologist who attended at popular prices at a clinic maintained by the church. Dr. Cecilia was around 40, wore large glasses that amplified her gentle eyes, and had an incredible capacity to listen without judging. In the first sessions, I could barely speak. The words got stuck in my throat, as if by pronouncing them, I was making everything real again. Dr. Cecilia waited patiently, without pressuring, just creating a safe space where eventually my story could emerge. And it emerged, in fragments, in whispers, in screams, in tears. The childhood marked by rivalry fueled by my father, the painful separation, the fateful reunion, my father's hands where they shouldn't be, my brother's words revealing a horror greater than I could imagine, and then the spiral of self-destruction that almost cost me my life. "What you lived through was terrible, Margaret," Dr. Cecilia said when I finally managed to tell everything. "But the fact that you're here telling this story already shows your extraordinary strength. You are a survivor. Survivor." The word echoed inside me like a bell. I had never thought of myself that way. I saw myself as a victim, as a failure, as someone irreparably broken. But survivor, that implied strength, resilience, qualities I didn't believe I possessed. "I don't feel strong," I confessed. "I feel damaged forever." "The two things can be true at the same time," she replied with a wisdom that only now, at 68, I fully understand. You can carry deep scars and still be strong. In fact, it's often precisely because of these scars that we develop our greatest strength. The years from 1982 to 1984 were of intense therapy, of regular participation in AA meetings, of small steps toward a life that wasn't defined only by the pain of the past. It wasn't a linear path. There were relapses, moments of despair so deep that the roof called to me again. But each time I fell, I got up a little faster, a little stronger. In 1983, I received news about my father and my brother for the first time in years. My uncle Augustus, who maintained contact with acquaintances in our hometown, wrote to me telling that my father had died in prison. Liver cirrhosis, as was to be expected. As for Thomas, he had enlisted in the army as soon as he turned 18 and was serving somewhere in the Midwest. The news of my father's death hit me in an unexpected way. I didn't feel joy or relief, not even sadness. I felt nothing, as if he had been dead to me for a long time. As for Thomas, a pang of concern crossed me. Had he changed, or was he taking his demons to new places, new victims? I decided I couldn't carry this worry too. I had learned in AA meetings that there are things beyond our control, that we need to accept our powerlessness before them. Thomas, and the man he would become, was one of those things. In 1984, at 27, I felt I was ready for a new beginning. Norfolk held many painful memories. My mother, though partially recovered from the stroke, never returned to being the same. Retired due to disability, she spent her days at home, increasingly dependent on me and Mrs. Eunice. It was then that I received an unexpected invitation. Joanna, a regular client at the salon where I worked, was moving to Savannah and needed someone to take over her small beauty salon in the Ardsley Park neighborhood. "You have talent, Margaret," she said, "and you need a fresh start. Savannah is a vibrant city, full of life. It would be perfect for you." The idea of moving to another city, of starting from scratch, was both terrifying and incredibly attractive. But there was my mother. How could I leave her? It was she herself who resolved this dilemma. "Go, my daughter," she said one afternoon when we were discussing the possibility. "You've already sacrificed too much of your life for me. Now it's time to live for yourself." "But what about you? Who will take care of you?" She smiled. That smile that, despite all the trials, never lost its sweetness. "Mrs. Eunice already said I can go live with her if you go. Her apartment is bigger, has a small maid's room she doesn't use. And I'll be fine. I'll worry about you, but I'll be fine." With my mother's blessing and the support of my AA friends, I packed my bags and left for Savannah on a June morning in 1984. I carried little: some clothes, my work tools, photographs of my mother, and something I didn't possess when I arrived in Norfolk 12 years before. Hope. I didn't know it yet, but that bus journey along the East Coast wasn't just a change of city. It was the beginning of a new life. A life where I would finally learn not just to survive, but to flourish. Where I would know true love, form a family, and find a greater purpose that would transform all past suffering into something meaningful. Savannah welcomed me with open arms and a warm breeze. I remember the bus crossing the bridge over the Savannah River, the rising sun tinting the sky orange and pink, reflecting on the waters as if God himself had spilled paint over the world. It was in that instant, with my face pressed against the window like a child's, that I felt something awaken inside me, an almost forgotten sensation of wonder, of possibilities. Joanna's small salon was on a cobblestone street in Ardsley Park, a beautiful Savannah neighborhood that pulsed with life and color. It was a modest space, 3 chairs, 2 wash basins, mirrors a bit stained by time, but clean and well-maintained. A wooden counter served as reception, and in the back there was a small, improvised kitchen with a coffee maker, microwave, and a miniature refrigerator for refreshments offered to clients. Daisy Salon, I baptized the place, painting the name on the facade with blue and white letters. It seemed appropriate, not just because daisies, or marguerites in French, reminded me of my name, but because daisies are resistant flowers that grow even in poor soil, that return year after year, indifferent to bad weather. The first months were difficult. Scarce clientele, tight money, lonely nights in the small room I rented in the back of a boarding house 2 blocks from the salon. But there was a fundamental difference. I was sober. Each morning I woke with a clear mind, ready to face the day, no matter how challenging it might be. I found an AA group in Savannah and went to meetings religiously, 3 times a week. It was there that I met Miss Rita, a lady of almost 70, completely white hair, and a smile that lit up any environment. Sober for more than 30 years, she became my sponsor, my confidant, a kind of grandmother I never had. "The secret, my child, is to transform pain into purpose," she would tell me as we had coffee in the small square after meetings. "If you only feel the pain, it destroys you. But if you use it to help others, it becomes your greatest strength." Her words fell on fertile soil within me. I began to look at my past not just as a personal tragedy, but as an experience that gave me a unique understanding of human pain. In the salon, this translated into a special sensitivity with my clients. It wasn't just hair that I cut. It was self-esteem that I reconstructed. I noticed the subtle signs, the woman who couldn't look at herself in the mirror, the one who flinched at the slightest touch, the one who used too heavy makeup to hide suspicious marks. Without invading privacies, I offered a safe space, a conversation without judgments, sometimes just welcoming silence. Word of mouth began to bring more clients. "Go to Daisy Salon. She has magic hands," they would say. It wasn't just my technical skills they praised, but something more intangible, the ability to make them feel seen, respected, renewed. In 1986, with the salon established and a loyal clientele, my life took another unexpected turn. One rainy March afternoon, a man entered the salon, tall, broad-shouldered, hair beginning to thin at the temples, large worker's hands, carrying a toolbox, and an expression of someone who would rather be anywhere else. "Good afternoon," he said, visibly uncomfortable. "Ms. Margaret? They called me to fix the shower in the wash basin." It was Joseph Sanders, barber and part-time electrician, widower for 3 years, father of 2 grown children, a simple man from rural Georgia with a heavy accent and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. Normally, the presence of an unknown man in the salon would leave me tense, alert. But there was something about Joseph, perhaps the respectful way he maintained distance, perhaps the almost shy way of speaking, that didn't trigger my usual alarms. He fixed the shower in less than an hour, refused the coffee I offered, charged a fair price, and left with a nod of his head. I thought I would never see him again. A week later, he returned, not to fix something, but as a client. "I need a haircut," he explained, running his hand through the graying hair on the sides. "My son is getting married next month. I have to look presentable." While cutting his hair, we talked, or rather, he talked, and I listened, fascinated by his story. Born in rural Georgia, he had learned the barber trade from his father. He married young to his childhood sweetheart, had 2 children, lived a simple but happy life until cancer took his wife in just 6 months. 3 years have passed, and I still talk to her before going to sleep, he confessed, his eyes fixed on his own reflection in the mirror. "People say time heals, but I think we just learn to live with the holes that remain in our lives." That phrase stayed with me for days. It was exactly how I felt about my own traumas. not healed, but transformed into spaces I had learned to live with. After that haircut, Joseph began to appear at the salon regularly, sometimes for small repairs, sometimes as a client, sometimes just to bring bread from the bakery where he bought his breakfast. We developed a cautious, respectful friendship based on a mutual understanding of pain that only those who have faced the worst can have. 6 months after our first meeting, he invited me to be his companion at his son's wedding. I accepted, nervous as a teenager, not knowing exactly what that meant. The wedding was in a small church in Forsyth Park, followed by a simple celebration in a parish hall decorated with paper flowers and colored lights. It was the first time I saw Joseph truly smile, a smile that began in his eyes and illuminated his entire face when he watched his son and new daughter-in-law dancing their first waltz as a married couple. "Thank you for coming with me," he said, when he took me home at the end of the night. "It was good not to be alone today." "It was good for me too," I replied, surprising myself with the sincerity of those words. Our relationship progressed at a glacial pace by anyone's normal standards. Joseph never pressured, never demanded, never crossed the invisible boundaries I established. When I told him, after almost a year of chaste dates, about my past with alcoholism, he simply took my hand between his and said, "Each sober day is a victory, Margaret. I'm proud of each one of them." It took me 2 more years to tell him about my father, about Thomas, about the horror that almost happened in that distant house in 1972. It was a 4th of July night in 1989. We were sitting on the porch of the small house that Joseph had in the Victorian district, watching the fireworks explode over the river. Suddenly, a particularly loud crack made me jump from the chair, shaking uncontrollably. Joseph didn't ask anything, just hugged me until the tremor passed, and then, like a dam that finally gives way under excessive pressure, the words began to flow. I told him everything, every sordid detail, every nightmare, every invisible scar I carried. When I finished, exhausted and vulnerable, I expected to see in his eyes what I always feared: disgust, pity, judgment. Instead, I saw only love, a love so pure, so unconditional that it made me cry again. "None of this changes what I feel for you," he said simply. "It only makes me admire even more the incredible woman you've become, despite everything." We married in January 1990, in an intimate ceremony on Tybee Island, with few guests. My mother came from Norfolk, brought by Mrs. Eunice, who, despite her advanced age, insisted on accompanying her. My Uncle Augustus couldn't come, but sent a telegram and a gift. A set of gold rings that I later discovered were the same ones that had belonged to my maternal grandparents. Joseph's children, John and Peter, welcomed me with open arms into the family, especially John, whose wedding had been my first outing with Joseph and who now expected his first child with his wife, Louise. Our beginning of married life was one of adaptations. Joseph had his barbershop for decades in the same spot near the historic district. I had my salon in Ardsley Park. We decided to keep both businesses, living in his house in the Victorian district, which was more or less halfway between the two establishments. Physical intimacy was another challenge. Despite all the therapy, all the journey traveled, the ghosts still appeared at the most unexpected moments. Joseph, with his infinite patience, never complained, never made me feel inadequate. We advanced at the pace I could bear, retreated when necessary, always with respect, always with love. "We have all the time in the world," he would say. And indeed, we did. In September 1990, John and Louise had their first child, a strong and healthy boy they named Michael. Becoming a surrogate grandmother at 33 was one of the greatest joys of my life. Holding that baby in my arms, smelling his talcum powder smell, hearing his demanding little cry, awakened in me a feeling I never imagined I would experience. "I want to have a child," I said to Joseph one night after returning from the maternity ward. "Our child." He looked at me, surprised. We had talked about this before, and I had always been clear that I didn't feel capable of being a mother, that I carried too many traumas to risk transferring them to an innocent child. "Are you sure, Margaret? It doesn't have to be now. We can wait longer, think better." "I'm sure," I replied, a deep conviction taking hold of me. "I don't want fear to continue deciding my life. I want to raise a child with love, show that the story can be different, that the cycle can be broken. In August 1991, our daughter Lucy was born, after a difficult but uncomplicated delivery. When the midwife placed her in my arms, small and perfect, with dark fuzz covering her little head, I felt as if a circle had closed, as if all the pains, all the horrors I had lived had been, in some mysterious way, the necessary path to bring me to this moment, to this life that had grown inside me, to this love that transcended anything I had ever experienced. Lucy was a calm child, with easy smiles and insatiable curiosity. She grew up between the salon and the barber shop, surrounded by adults who adored her, learning from an early age the value of honest work and genuine affection. Joseph was a devoted father, present in every moment, from the first words to the first romantic disappointments in adolescence. In 1995, we expanded the businesses. We united the salon and the barber shop in a single larger space, creating Sanders and Daisy, one of the first unisex salons in Savannah. We hired employees, invested in modern equipment, created a loyal clientele that spanned generations: grandmothers, mothers and daughters, grandfathers, fathers, and sons. Life followed its course, with its daily joys and challenges. My mother, now elderly and more fragile, came to live with us in 1998 after Mrs. Eunice's death. It was a period of deep reconnection between us, of healing old wounds, of building new memories that weren't stained by the past. "You saved me, my daughter," she said to me one afternoon as I combed her completely white hair when we were just the two of us. "When we were alone in Norfolk, when you were at rock bottom, I thought I had completely failed as a mother. Seeing you now, strong, fulfilled, gives me peace to depart when it's my time." She passed away peacefully in 2001, sleeping in her room in our house, with a light smile on her lips. The pain of loss was deep but not devastating. There was gratitude for having had time to rebuild our relationship, for her having met her granddaughter, for having departed knowing I was well. The 2000s brought new chapters. Lucy, grown and determined, decided to study psychology, inspired, according to her, by the stories she heard about how therapy had been fundamental in my recovery. "I want to help people who have been through traumas, Mom," she told me upon being accepted to Savannah College of Art and Design's psychology program in 2009. "I want to do for others what Dr. Cecilia did for you." I couldn't help but cry upon hearing those words. The girl I had given birth to had not only escaped the shadow of my traumas, she was transforming that story into fuel to help others. She was living proof that cycles can be broken, that suffering can be transmuted into compassion. Joseph and I, already entering middle age, began to think about slowing down. We passed more responsibilities to trusted employees, took our first complete weekends off, made our first true trip to Charleston, where Joseph had always dreamed of seeing the historic district. In 2015, at 58, I officially retired from the salon, though I still appeared sometimes a week to attend to old clients who refused to have their hair touched by other hands. Joseph continued working for 2 more years until arthritis in his hands made it impossible to handle scissors and razors with the necessary precision. Our life entered a more tranquil, more contemplative rhythm. Mornings on the porch watching the neighborhood, afternoons tending to the small garden we cultivated in the backyard of the house, evenings watching TV shows hand in hand on the sofa. A simple happiness built on solid foundations of mutual respect and deep understanding. In 2020, at the height of the pandemic that isolated the world, Joseph was diagnosed with a serious heart problem. He needed to undergo a complicated surgery, followed by months of recovery. They were times of anxiety and fear, but also of deep gratitude for each extra day we had together. "I almost lost you," I whispered one night, lying beside him, listening to his breathing, now more regular, stronger. "But you didn't," he replied, squeezing my hand. "We still have history to write, Margaret." And we continued writing. Joseph recovered completely, to the surprise of the doctors who considered his case too delicate for a total recovery. Lucy, now graduated and with her own practice, presented us in 2022 with the news that we would be grandparents. She and her husband Frank were expecting their first child. Mary Helen was born in October 2022, a girl with curious eyes and light hair that don't resemble anyone in the family. When I held her for the first time, I thought of the girl I had been, of the terror I had lived, of the abyss that had almost swallowed me. And then I looked at that perfect little face, at that life that was beginning without the weight of ancestral traumas, and I knew with absolute certainty that all the suffering had been worth it if the final result was this moment, this family, this love. Today, at 68, I look back and see a life that, despite all the horrors of the beginning, transformed into something beautiful. I am a retired hairdresser, wife of a retired barber, mother of a brilliant psychologist, grandmother of an enchanting girl. I live in a simple but cozy house in Savannah where the sound of tourists embellishes my nights and the smell of pralines from the candy shops enters through the window on Sunday afternoons. Joseph, at 75, continues to be my safe harbor, my best friend, my life companion. Together, we learned that true love isn't just about moments of joy, but about holding each other's hand in moments of darkness, about respecting scars, about having patience with occasional nightmares, about celebrating each small victory as if it were the greatest achievement in the world. My dears who have accompanied me to this point in this story, so difficult, so painful, but also so full of hope and redemption, thank you very much for listening to this grandma share her journey. If my story touched your heart in some way, I ask that you leave your like, subscribe to Grandparents' Tales, and share with someone who might need to hear that no matter how deep the darkness, there is always possibility for light. Because if there's one thing I've learned in all these years, it's that our stories have power. Power to heal, power to connect, power to show that no one is alone in their pain or in their struggle. And when we share these stories, when we allow our scars to become bridges instead of walls, we create a world that's a little better, a little more compassionate, a little more human. Thank you for listening to me, for crying and smiling with me, for walking alongside me on this journey of memories. May God bless each one of you, and may your own stories, no matter how difficult they may seem right now, also find a happy ending, just as mine did. If this story touched your heart, please remember to like this video, subscribe to, and let me know in the comments which part of America you're watching from. Your support means the world to me and helps others find these stories of healing and hope. Until next time, this is Grandma Margaret, sending love from my heart to yours.